Matt Gaetz has introduced a Ukraine Fatigue Act, and the country is becoming fatigued about the war. Support for the Ukraine proxy war, for sending all this money to Ukrainian warlords. The numbers are going down among Democrats. A new poll in Italy by a mainstream Italian paper, maybe I'll put up the poll later, shows that a vast majority of Italians would like to end the war immediately and require Ukraine to cede territory to Russia that it has lost in order to save lives and end the war. Italians are suffering economically far worse than Americans are. I was there in early November, and the public heat was being delayed for several weeks because of energy shortages. So those numbers make sense. So Samantha Power has gone to Fareed Zakaria, a real hard-hitting interviewer who's definitely going to ask some extremely critical questions, to have a town hall. I think it was alongside Jake Sullivan, in order to explain the importance of the war to Americans. And it wasn't exactly like they were allowing the town into this hall, because if that had happened, the results would have been different. Let's hear from Samantha Power, who is basically the queen of humanitarian R2P liberal interventionism.
What is at stake in Ukraine are values and interests so core to the United States.
Values. They always talk about values.
Just wanting your freedom and your independence. I mean, this country is predicated on exactly those two values. Imagine the counterfactual, where we walk away or we didn't show up in the first place. And what that would mean when...
If we didn't show up in the first place, this never would have happened. Everything she's saying is so suffused with deception.
And a dictator who has shut down civil society, shut down independent media, shut down dissenting voices in his own country.
Is she talking about Zelensky? Because there's no independent media in Ukraine.
Then
or is she talking about imprisoning Julian Assange?
And with impunity, take over that country. I mean, what would that mean?
No one's trying to take over Ukraine.
For our allies in Europe, what would that mean for our own security over time? So I think, Americans understand bullies and the importance of standing up to bullies. At the same time, again, we're very alert to the risks, given that Russia is a nuclear armed power, as you rightly say. But that is, again, how we are in the position that we are in now, building a coalition of countries coming together, making sure that this isn't just the United States and Russia, that this, in fact, is Ukrainians on the front lines, Ukrainians doing the fighting, and a coalition of 50 countries rallying behind them, and including actually today, more than 140 countries at the UN signaling still a year into the war their support for Ukraine's self-defense.
There's a lot to chew on there. I'm surprised how inarticulate she is, considering her background in media and how she's been propped up as such a genius. And I wonder, is she as daft as she seems, or is she selling the American public on a bunch of lies? Because virtually everything she said was false or contained some element of misinformation. I mean,
she's a seasoned scam artist. She's been pushing lies to justify U.S. aggression in country after country, in Syria and Libya, and she's applying that to here. And she has this kind of her and Maddow have a similar shtick where they'll pretend to be sort of like, they have this kind of earnest shtick. Well, they pretend to just be like they don't understand why our enemies can't possibly understand how generous we are and how well intentioned we are. And imagine if we weren't there doing all these wonderful things, what a terrible world it is. So she poses as a humanitarian to spread aggression and death. I mean, that's her job. And she's one of the most disingenuous people, I think, in political life today. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, you're doing a town hall with Fareed Zakaria. Zakaria, it demonstrates how the colonial subject can propel his ambitions within an imperial society, and that is to be the ultimate stooge of those in power. He never, ever, he goes to Davos and will never ask a tough question. He'll never ask a tough question there in that interview setting. And all of his critical questions are always framed in a way that gives his guest an out. I've never seen any of these people subjected to the kind of tough interviews that, for example, George W. Bush subjected himself to when he went on Meet the Press with Tim Russert. Obviously, he was losing popularity. Americans were dying in the war. But, Biden has never sat down for a tough interview. Vladimir Zelensky, have you ever seen a sit-down interview with him where he actually has to answer tough questions? No. So this is complete theater, and it's actually dramatically different from the last CNN town hall that I remember about a war by a Democratic administration, featuring Madeleine Albright, who was kind of a mentor to Samantha Power and the liberal interventionists.
Yeah.
And Albright, by the way, was herself mentored by Zbigniew Brzezinski at Georgetown University. Both are children of Europe who come from anti-communist families who saw land taken by communists, who came to the United States to try to engineer regime change wars to get revenge on the Soviet Union. So this is an amazing, and I think this should inspire those of you out there who want to get offline and do some activism against this war. This is from a town hall on Iraq. I think it was 1999, after the Iraq Liberation Act was passed, setting the stage by the Clinton administration for the regime change war in Iraq. And it's Sandy Berger and Madeleine Albright. And the town hall actually featured members of the town. It wasn't controlled the way the one with Jake Sullivan and Samantha Power was.
The microphone is off. There we are. What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
Yeah, this is a question that goes to the heart of the values that Samantha Power espouses. Everybody knows there's no values there.
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying.
Look how big it is in there. It's like a real arena.
That it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to.
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending them in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
So that was what a real town hall would look like if one were allowed. And Aaron, any reaction?
Well, I think they've learned their lesson from the Albright experience, because there hasn't been anything that I can remember like that since. That was an amazing episode. That was broadcast live on CNN. I remember it well. And I mean, something like that since hasn't happened. The closest we've gotten to the truth from our U.S. officials is when they accidentally blurted out. Like, remember when Joe Biden was speaking at Harvard College in 2015 or 2014, and he accidentally admitted that there was no moderate rebels in Syria, and that the U.S. allies were supporting an insurgency dominated by, he said, Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Sponsored by Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Yeah. It's like the problem is our allies over there.
Yeah,
because he gets the briefings and he doesn't know that you're not supposed to actually tell the public the truth. So he went on some international apology tour, and he had to call Erdogan, sorry, please keep the ISIS guys going over the border.
Yeah,
John Kerry's watching them.
Yeah, and of course, and there's no journalist to ask these people any of these questions because no one gets challenged. I mean, look again. Even the progressives in Congress, when they go on their friendly media outlets, nobody questions. The only person I've seen question a progressive member of Congress aggressively when it comes to the Ukraine proxy war was Brianna Joy Gray when she interviewed Ro Khanna. I can't think of any other examples.
Well,
unless you did, but you did, of course, in the street. But I mean, when they go on shows, it doesn't happen anymore.
Well, Anna Kasparian gave a hardball interview to Madeleine Albright at the Munich Security Conference. No.
Yeah, right. I think she actually tried to argue, like whenever that whole thing was happening where they called me a Russian agent and blah, blah, blah. I think she tried to argue that she did actually give Madeleine Albright an adversarial interview, which was so funny. But who cares?
Yeah, it's an honor to meet you, and it's such a pleasure. And wow, let's pose for pictures with this great feminist icon who blew up women in Serbia and Iraq. Well, there actually was a confrontation recently by Jose Vega, who's a political activist in the Bronx, or in New York, and Hakeem Jeffries, who's the new Democratic minority leader. And I thought this was significant. This is what journalists should be doing. This is what anti-war activists should be doing.
Yep.
And let's take a look at that.
The UN Security Council had a meeting yesterday, and Ray McGovern spoke to it. He is a former member of the CIA, and he testified in support of Seymour Hersh's article on the United States bombing Nord Stream.
And this is a town hall.
If it is proven that the United States bombed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, as has been asserted by Seymour Hersh and his article, will you call for the United States to acknowledge and admit that that was an act of war against Germany and Russia? And I'm asking this because this may be the only way to prevent the rest of us from being killed in a thermonuclear war. And I don't want to be fried. Don't you think the media should be reporting on whether or not this is true? And don't you think you should be inquiring into whether or not this is true?
Well, thank you for the question. One, I've got no information to suggest that the United States was involved in bombing the Nord
Of course you don't.
Stream pipeline.
Because he would have,
Hold on.
you would have been, you weren't briefed on it.
Sir,
Sir, you got your chance to ask a
yes,
question.
so you give me an opportunity to respond.
You weren't given information because he explicitly says you weren't briefed on it. Shouldn't it inquire?
So here's what I'll say about, I think, President Biden's leadership generally as it relates to the Ukraine and Russia.
We committed an act of war. What are you doing to respond to that? We have to hold Biden accountable. Listen, you're from Brooklyn, right? You know when to call bullshit when you see it. So do I. This is bullshit right now. And I see what's happening right now. That does not silence me.
So-
You can hear me right now. I want you to say something about the bombing, because we're all going to die from a nuclear war right now unless you stop it and you at least put and inquire into whether or not it's true. This war in Ukraine is going to leave us all dead. So what are you going to do? Because you need to inquire. I'm a New Yorker too.
Here's what I'll say.
Say it.
We're going to continue to stand with the Ukrainian people.
That's fucking
against
bullshit.
their
Do not
war
do that. You will end us all
in
dead.
this war against
We
Vladimir
need
Putin.
peace. We need talks.
Because
Why are
it's
you
not
sabotaging
just-
talks?
it's
Do not
just
put your
a
hands on
battle
me.
between
We need
Ukraine
peace talks.
and
I am not
Russia.
going to take this.
It's a
We need
battle.
Well, that's how you do it. I mean, I think that's how you have to do it at this point to get your point across, especially if you feel like there's any urgency here as the conflict escalates. I see a lot of people kind of dismissing the idea that this could turn nuclear. But in any case, that was Hakeem Jeffries' response, and it was complete boilerplate. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries is a company man. We've talked about him before. He's a pet project of the Israel lobby and of Wall Street. And that's what we expected